Number 1.
Brittney was last seen in Sturgis, Michigan on September 16, 1997. She was seen playing outside of her apartment in the Village Manor apartment complex. Her mother, Tina Stiedler, left the apartment at approximately 8:30 p.m. to go and run some errands. Brittney was playing alone on her bicycle at the time her mother left. She had been outside for an hour by that time. About 5 minutes after Tina left, Brittney's half-brother reportedly saw her sitting on a bench that was in front of their residence. Some accounts state Brittney was riding her bicycle along with her brother, but that they became separated when he crossed the street. Brittney was not allowed to do this. Shortly after this, a witness said he saw Brittney speaking with an unidentified man in a vehicle. The man was described as a Caucasian male who was in his late 20s to early 30s in 1997. He had short dark hair and a thick mustache. He was driving a red or brown 1980s mid-sized Renault. The witness said shortly thereafter, Brittney walked over to him, and she said that she made a new friend. Brittney disappeared and was never seen or heard from again. Tina returned home at 9:05 p.m., approximately 35 minutes after she last saw Brittney. She asked Brittney's brother to go and look for her, but he was unable to locate her. The police were called at this point. An extensive search of the area uncovered no evidence of the child's whereabouts. A bloodhound that was used in the search for her was able to trace Brittney's scent to the parking lot of a nearby convenience store that was frequently utilized by interstate truckers. Nothing else was found. Investigators believe Brittney was possibly kidnapped by someone she wasn't acquainted with her, and she was taken out of the area. The police have ruled out any possibility of her wandering away or running off due to her age. Investigators have found no concrete evidence of who she might have been taken by. Her bicycle she was riding was eventually found abandoned near her home. Investigators distributed a sketch of the man seen speaking with Brittney to the general public in hopes they could identify him. He is not considered a suspect, but police would like to speak with him in regards to the case. Investigators do not know if he is connected to Brittney's presumed abduction in any manner, but he is someone of interest that they would like to speak with. Investigators have stated that there were at least 5 attempted abductions in the days before and after Brittney went missing in St. Joseph County. On September 7, 1997, a 32-year-old woman was walking on Big Hill Road at 1:30 p.m. in Sturgis when she was accosted by a man who tries to force her into his car. She managed to escape him and even scratched him in the face in the process. On September 10, an 11-year-old girl was nearly abducted when 2 white males attempted to lure her into their vehicle. The girl recalled that one of the men had a scar on his face. She managed to run back home safely. The attempted abduction occurred in Centerville at approximately 7 p.m. On September 15, a white male attempted to lure a boy into a vehicle in Constantine. The boy was able to run home safely. This attempted kidnapping occurred at approximately 4:30 p.m. On September 19, one of 3 men attempted to force a 12-year-old girl into a red 2-door mid-sized vehicle in the parking lot of Mendon High School. She got away from the men and ran home safely and uninjured. The man in that case had a similar car to the driven by the man sought for questioning in the beer case. The man who attempted to abduct the 12-year-old girl was described as being around 20 years old, who stood at 5 feet 10 inches. He is described as being Caucasian and weighed around 200 pounds. He had blonde hair that was cut shorter on the top but longer on the back. It's unknown if these abduction attempts are linked to Brittney's case. The men sought in those cases have not been identified by police. After Brittney went missing, rumors began to circulate regarding her family and the children's house life. Brittney was oftentimes spotted playing outside by herself. She once told a neighbor that her mother would lock her out of the house for being bad. Another neighbor would always see Brittney playing in the sandbox near her own apartment alone. The neighbor would tell Brittney to return home because the sandbox is far away from her apartment. Just a few days after her disappearance, Brittney's uncle, James Allen Beers, was arrested on domestic violence charges that were unrelated to Brittney's case. He lived with Brittney, her mother, and her siblings at the time of her disappearance. Months after Brittney's disappearance in January of 1998, her older brother, Joshua Lee Folsom, and younger sister, Autumn Stiedler, were both removed from the home due to alleged child abuse by James Allen Beers. Tina was urged to leave him due to the abuse he put her children though, but she refused, and as a result they were taken from her care. Tina had dispositional hearings where she was ordered to get a job and to maintain a stabilized environment in her home for her children to remain in. She would not regain custody unless she left James. Joshua feared him and he has a history of violence towards children. James was not the only who allegedly abused the children. Court records indicated that there was alleged abuse from Kevin Folsom. He was the father of Joshua. He was previously convicted of criminal sexual conduct and had been in prison since 1996. The victim in that case was Brittney. She was sexually abused by him when she was just 3 years old. Brittney's abuse came to light when she refused to let her babysitter bathe her one evening. The babysitter questioned Brittney's refusal, and she told her that Folsom had been molesting her. When Folsom was interviewed in August of 1995, he told police he became aroused while bathing Brittney and touched her. Autumn's father was Lonnie Garvey. He passed away in 1996, unfortunately. He was described as a good and devoted father. He was a cook at Herman's East Side food shop. He was often seen feeding Brittney and her siblings inside the restaurant. A waitress at the restaurant told police it was possible someone abducted Brittney to give her a better life, since she had no stability in her home. The following year after Brittney's disappearance, Tina had a termination petition hearing in which she volunteered to have her parental rights to Joshua and Autumn taken away. She admitted that she did not have the financial accommodations that she needed to take care of her children. Brittney was removed from this petition due to her status as a missing child. If she was found, there would be a deprecate petition to have her taken away from her mother as well. Tina's father was granted custody of Joshua while her brother and his wife took custody of Autumn. In 2000, investigators went after a lead in the case that came from Detroit, Michigan. Over 2,000 images depicting child pornography was discovered on the computer of a man, Russell Toombs. He was 41 years old at the time of his arrest. In more than a dozen of these photos, a young girl can be seen in them. The child looked to be in between the ages of 4 and 6. The young girl in the photos appeared to be crying as she was raped by an older man, and appeared to be tied up in a laundry room and a bedroom. Investigators released photographs of the file to the Maya in hopes that they could identify her. Shortly thereafter, the Sturgis Police Department called and said they believed the girl resembled Brittney. After a week, investigators found that the file in the photographs was not Brittney. The girl was eventually tracked to Texas and testified against her parents, who were later convicted of child pornography charges. The photograph and its possible relation to Brittney's case brought renewed interest and media attention to the case. In 2015, investigators named child killer Daniel Kevin Furlong as a possible suspect in Brittney's presumed abduction. Furlong was convicted on charges of second-degree murder in the death of 11-year-old Jodi Parak, who was killed on November 8, 2007, in Constantine Township, Michigan. He was found to be responsible after he attempted to lure a 10-year-old girl into his white pigeon garage in the summer of 2015. The girl managed to escape and he was arrested for that crime. His DNA was taken, and police found it was a match to blood and saliva found in Parak's body. He formally confessed to killing Parak by strangling her, and that he dumped her body in a cemetery. Investigators believe he was likely involved in more crimes than just Parak's murder. Constantine Township is only 16 miles and 23 minutes away from Sturgis, where Brittney disappeared from. Authorities have noted that Furlong matches the sketch and description of the man that Brittney was seen speaking to before her disappearance. Jodi Parak physically resembles Brittney, and Furlong's crimes match up with Brittney's disappearance. Investigators have reason to believe Furlong was in Sturgis at the time of Brittney's 1997 disappearance. He was questioned in regards to the beer case, but he denied that he abducted or killed Brittney, but investigators cannot eliminate him and can't definitively say he's telling the truth. Furlong seemed to be cold and unremorseful when talking about the Parak murder. Furlong was sentenced to 30 to 60 years for the murder of Jodi Parak. Investigators states that they have other persons of interest in Brittney's disappearance, but cannot release their names since the investigation into her disappearance is active. Brittney's disappearance had a heavy impact on the area's citizens in the years after it occurred. Every year, to mark her disappearance, a group of people would gather at the Village Manor apartments where she went missing from. Although the beach she was sitting on is long gone, the memories of her life and her disappearance remain. Her grandparents and mother have attended these events. Brittney's presumed abduction remains unsolved and foul play is suspected. There's been no sign of her since 1997.
Number 2.
Avery was last seen in Natchitoches, Louisiana on November 5, 1990. She was selling candy door to door that day, as she wanted to help raise money for her school orchestra. She stopped by a friend's home before her disappearance and told her that she needed to deliver a few more candy bars quickly and that she would go straight home afterwards. She was last seen in the area of 5th and Stevens Street at 4:30 p.m. She never returned home and was never seen or heard from again afterwards. Her parents reported her missing at 7:28 p.m. after she never came home and after her family was unable to locate her. Despite an extensive search by police and investigators, no trace of Avery was found during the initial stages of the investigation. At the time she went missing, she was riding a multicolored white, pink, and purple Maury bicycle. It was not located when she initially disappeared. Avery's family was extensively questioned by law enforcement and are not considered suspects in the case. Investigators assured her father that these were the necessary measures taken during a missing persons investigation and that it was used to try to narrow down possible suspects in the case. Investigators additionally searched the Evans home for anything that might help find the girl, but nothing substantial was found. The only thing they took was a book that contained the names and phone calls from people they received since Avery went missing. Some thought Avery's disappearance might be connected to the presumed abduction of Kimberly Norwood. Norwood disappeared from Texas in May of 1989. She was last seen walking home from a friend's house. There's been no established link between the cases, and there are no named suspects in Norwood's abduction. Investigators believe Avery was abducted and murdered in the same day she disappeared. Shortly after her disappearance, investigators received an anonymous letter from an unnamed individual who claimed to have information on the case. The letter stated the individual was sorry for what he did and that all evidence went up in ashes to heaven, so she is with God. Investigators originally thought the letter was a hoax. Avery's father didn't give much credibility to the letter, and he remained hopeful he would find his daughter alive and safe. It was believed the individual likely got Avery's information and description off the newspapers and posters that were shown after her presumed abduction. The letter was mailed from Many, Louisiana. Investigators later traced it back to Philip Louis Dazelle. Philip was Avery's neighbor in 1990. Avery has sold candy to him on 3 different occasions in the past month before she went missing. She told this to her stepsister and additionally stated that Philip asked for her home address and her telephone number. He was arrested in January of 1991 and was charged with first-degree murder and kidnapping in relation to Avery's presumed death. He later confessed in a written statement that he lured Avery into his home where he strangled her. He stated that he dumped Avery's bicycle in Sybil Lake and he allegedly disposed of her body by putting it in a dumpster. In 1990, all garbage from the area was taken to a landfill about 70 miles away in DeSoto Parish. The FBI along with police searched through mountains of garbage for weeks but didn't find any trace of Avery's remains. Avery's bicycle was found in the lake he said it would be in. Since investigators lacked her body, the court had a hard time proving first-degree murder. Philip subsequently pleaded guilty to manslaughter and kidnapping. He was sentenced to 40 years in prison and another 10 years respectively. When asked why he killed the girl, he responded that he had a bad day and just snapped. Investigators originally closed Avery's case following the confession and sentencing. Years after her disappearance, the investigation into Avery's presumed abduction was reopened and they dig up the driveway of the home that Philip lived in at the time. Nothing was found as a result of the search. Philip came up for parole in 2007, but Avery's family petitioned to have his parole denied. The board denied his request at the time. On January 22, 2015, Philip was released from prison on parole. He served just 24 years of his 40 to 50-year sentence. He was relocated to Ville Platte after his release, but many residents including Avery's family were outraged by his release and relocation. In fact, his address was leaked and posted all over social media at the time. He was rearrested on a parole violation after his living agreement changed. Philip's last known location was in Alexandria, Louisiana. He is required to wear a GPS monitor until his supervised parole ends, which is on July 30, 2040. He is required to follow a curfew that ends at 6 p.m., and he is required to notify police of any travel plans he might have. Avery's family remains outraged by his release and feel he should have stayed in prison for much longer. At the time of her disappearance, Avery was described as a straight-A student and a talented violinist. Her 2 sisters have never really gotten over her death and were said to be extremely close to her at the time. Avery has never been located, but foul play is suspected in the case.
Number 3.
Matthew was abducted by a female acquaintance from his home in Van Buren, Arkansas on June 9, 1983. His mother, Mary Crocker, reportedly met a woman named Kathy Johnson through a male friend. Johnson was a rodeo worker and stopped in Fort Smith, Arkansas with the rest of the rodeo. Matthew's father was in jail at the time of his abduction, and Mary needed help with her children, so she asked Kathy to move in with her. Johnson was meant to stay in the home for only a week. On the night of June 9, there was a party at the Crocker house, and alcohol was a served beverage at this party. Matthew was last known to be sleeping in a crib with his 1-year-old sister, Elizabeth Christensen. When Mary woke up the next morning, she noticed her son and Johnson were not in the home. Mary filed an abduction report on her son. It's believed Johnson took Matthew whole. The rest of the family slept that night. The family car, a 1973 Chevrolet Vega, was also missing from the home. Police found the stolen vehicle near a rest stop in Sallisaw, Oklahoma. There was no trace of Matthew or his abductor, and they've never been seen or heard from since 1983. Mary recalled that the woman told her she once had 2 children who she lost shortly after birth. She said the children would have been 9 and 6 years old by 1983. Investigators have created a sketch of the child's kidnapper. Kathy Johnson is described as being approximately 26 years old in 1983. She was described as Caucasian and stood at 5 feet 4 inches. She had blonde hair at the time. She has a decayed or chipped front tooth, a 6 to 7 inch scar on her shoulder blade, and a puncture scar 6 to 8 inches above her right knee. Kathy has a green-yellow star or sunburst on the left side of her chest, a unicorn on her upper left arm, and the name Kathy with a ribbon above it on her upper right arm area. These are the tattoos that she had on her body in 1983. It's unknown if Kathy Johnson was her real name, and they haven't located the abductor. She might also use the name of Judy. Investigators have been able to determine that Kathy worked with a man who traveled to Kansas with a little old snake show type thing. Investigators have been unable to identify this individual, but are interested in speaking to him in regards to Matthew's abduction. Investigators believe Johnson and Matthew may have traveled through Utah to California after his abduction. A woman believed to be Johnson was overheard at an Oklahoma rest stop saying she was going there. Investigators believe Johnson took Matthew with the intentions of raising him as her own child. Police, along with his older sister, believe Matthew is still living and is unaware that he is a missing child. Matthew has 3 to 4 other siblings. His abduction remains unsolved.
Number 4.
Karen was last seen in Grenada, Mississippi on May 21, 1994. She was last seen leaving the River Hill Apartments on Monroe Street at 6:30 p.m. to go outside and play. She got permission from her stepfather, Shindong Hee, to do so. He was reportedly the last person to see Karen before her disappearance. He claimed he lost track of time and didn't notice Karen was missing until 11 p.m. He said he went outside to look for her, but she wasn't anywhere near on the apartment complex. Karen's mother, Wen Hua Zhu, was at work during the day of her daughter's disappearance and didn't get home until 12 a.m. She and her husband called the police to report Karen as a missing child. Karen was never seen or heard from again. Extensive searches of the area revealed no signs of Karen or her remains. Investigators believe Karen may have been abducted. During the afternoon of her disappearance, 2 children who knew Karen reportedly saw her getting into a van with a tall Asian man outside of a Grenada store. This is the last confirmed sighting of Karen that afternoon. Investigators initially believed Karen's biological father might have been involved in her abduction, but this was immediately ruled out. He was in China in 1994 when his daughter went missing, and Wen Hua said Karen had not heard from him in years, and they didn't even exchange writing with one another. He was ruled out as a suspect in the initial stages of the investigation. Wen Hua's American name is Mei, and she worked at the Grand Palace Chinese restaurant in 1994. Shindong did computer work for Walmart at the time of his stepdaughter's disappearance. Wen Hua had limited English skills at the time of her daughter's disappearance. She, along with the community of Grenada, were absolutely devastated by Karen's presumed abduction. In October of 1994, investigators considered kidnapping suspect Philip Dean Fleming as a possible suspect in Karen's disappearance. On September 12, 1994, Fleming kidnapped 8-year-old Santana Renee Boyd from Bramlett Elementary School in Oxford, Mississippi. He released her at a McDonald's restaurant in Jackson, Tennessee. Fleming is also suspected of 3 attempted abductions in central Mississippi the day before Boyd was kidnapped. He was also wanted in Lexington, South Carolina, for sexually assaulting a 12-year-old girl on August 21, 1994. He was found in Florida in October of 1994 and was using an alias. His identity was confirmed through fingerprints after he was arrested for auto theft. Investigators simply wanted to speak with him about Karen's case. They had no evidence that he was in the area when Karen's abduction occurred, and it's unknown if he's still considered a suspect in Karen's abduction. Shindong Hee is considered the primary suspect in Karen's disappearance. He refused to take a polygraph exam regarding the case, and Karen's teachers at her school told police that Karen would always show up to school with bruises. He was later convicted of aggravated assault. The victim in that case was Wen Hua. Shindong allegedly jumped on her while they were at a motel in Nashville, Tennessee. During the incident, Shindong admitted to killing Karen. She reported the admission to police, but Shindong denied it. Shindong was subsequently deported back to China due to his aggravated assault conviction. Investigators stated his deportation had nothing to do with Karen's disappearance, but they believe Shindong probably murdered Karen on the day she went missing. Investigators have noted they have no actual proof of Shindong's involvement, and he's never been charged with a crime. At the time of her disappearance, Karen was a student at Lizzie Horn Elementary School. She was described as a kind girl by her friends, and was reportedly a good student who loved being at school. Karen was still learning English at the time, but she had a good performance otherwise. Karen and her mother moved to Grenada in February of 1992. She had a younger 16-month-old brother at the time of her disappearance. Karen's disappearance remains unsolved. She is believed to have been the victim of a homicide, and her disappearance continues to be classified as a non-family abduction.
Number 5.
Charles was last seen in Santa Ana, California on April 9, 1979. On the day of his disappearance, he accompanied his father, Dennis, to work. Dennis delivered water tanks to businesses and private homes in 1979. After he finished his work, Dennis left Charles at the corner of Chestnut Avenue and Lion Street while he went to unload his truck at approximately 5:40 p.m. Dennis did not want his boss to find out that he had taken Charles to work that day, as children were not permitted to ride in the trucks. He told Charles to walk to an address in the 300 block of South Lion Street and wait for him to pick him up. Dennis left and came to the designated location approximately 10 minutes later. Charles was nowhere in sight. He was never seen or heard from again. Dennis searched the neighborhood before calling the police to report his son missing. Investigators initially believed that Charles' disappearance might have had something to do with his parents' custody battle. Charles' mother had legal custody of him in 1979, but he lived with Dennis for a large majority of his life. Dennis and Charles traveled to California from Colorado 3 weeks before, so he could attend a custody hearing which was scheduled for April 26. Investigators looked into the possibility that Charles was being concealed by one of his parents, but there's no evidence of this. Neither of them have been completely cleared in the investigation. Authorities also believe Christopher might have fallen victim to a child predator while he was alone that day. Child killer James Crummell is considered a primary suspect in Charles' disappearance. He was described as a violent serial child molester who has a criminal record of child molestation, which dates back to the 1960s. All of his known victims were roughly the same age as Charles. He's also considered a suspect in the 1995 California disappearance of 9-year-old Jack Phillips. On April 19, 1979, 13-year-old James Trotter was abducted by Crummell as he walked to school in Costa Mesa, California. He remained a missing person for 11 years until Crummell discovered his charred remains off Ortega Highway in 1990. Investigators originally assumed the remains belonged to a female decedent, but the remains were identified as those of Trotter in 1996. James' abduction occurred just 10 days after Charles went missing, and Crummell was known to be in the area at the time. Crummell was convicted of killing Trotter in 2004 and was sentenced to death. After his arrest in the case, investigators asked him about the Jack Phillips disappearance, and he stated he would openly confess to killing the boy if he could avoid the death sentence. The deal was denied. Crummell is believed to have more victims and might be a serial killer. In February of 1967, Frank Clausen was abducted as he rode his bike in a trailer park in Drexel Heights, Arizona. His bike was found the same night he disappeared. In the morning, Frank's strangled body was discovered by a police officer searching for him. He was strangled with his own belt. Frank managed to break away from his kidnapper for 30 feet until being recaptured and killed. Crummell lived in the trailer park with his partner, Steve Scheimer. 5 days after the murder, they left town. Scheimer told authorities that Crummell confessed to killing Frank as they left the area. He said he did it because he heard the boy's parents calling his name, and he feared the boy would answer. On August 29, 1967, Crummell picked up 14-year-old Steve Scallon in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He was returning home from football practice at the time. He picked the boy up in his laundry delivery truck. He stopped to get ice cream and then asked Steve if he wanted to go on a delivery. Steven accepted the offer. When they drove a few miles down the road, Crummell stopped the truck in front of a wooded area. He invited Steve to go for a walk, and when they got into some trees, Crummell said he wanted to show Steve a rope trick and proceeded to tie his hands together. He told the boy to try and get out of it and that he wouldn't hurt him. Crummell molested Steve and then took him back to the truck. They drove a few more miles and stopped again. They both walked back into the woods where Crummell molested him again. Steve lost consciousness and Crummell beat him with a tree limb severely and tossed him into a ravine. Scallon survived the attack and crawled out of the ravine the next morning. He had a fractured skull. Crummell was arrested 2 days after Steve's abduction. He was convicted for that crime and was originally sentenced to serve 30 years in prison. He served 5 years of that sentence and was released in 1972. In 1983, Crummell was convicted of killing Frank Clausen and was sentenced to life in prison. However, in 1987, his conviction was overturned on the basis of ineffective counseling. He did plead guilty to kidnapping Clausen and was released later that year. In June of 2012, Crummell took his own life by hanging himself with electric cord. He was never charged with Charles' disappearance, but he remains a strong suspect. It should be noted that Charles and Jack Phillips are the only presumed victims of Crummell that remain missing. Detectives are not fully convinced that Charles was abducted and killed. They believe he might still be alive and are urging him to come forward. Charles' uncle believes that Charles is still alive and moved in with another family with the help of Dennis in 1979. In 2015, investigators thought they might have found Charles alive and living in Colorado Springs, Colorado. This is the area Charles lived in before moving to California with his father. The man who was thought to be Charles also shared the same exact name as him. The man also resembled an age-progressed image that was made of Christopher in 2012. The man was asked if he was Christopher and he didn't really know himself at the time. A DNA test proved the man was not Charles. Investigators remain hopeful that Christopher is still living. It's possible he was abducted by someone he knew. At the time of his disappearance, Charles was described as quiet and shy. His family has stated he wouldn't talk to a stranger or get into a stranger's vehicle willingly. Both his parents said he wouldn't have wandered off and was independent for his age. He even walked home from school every day while he lived in Colorado Springs. His disappearance remains unsolved and he's missing under suspicious circumstances.